I was standing in my great-grandfather's living room when someone started pounding on the front door, like they were trying to break it down with their bare fists. The house had been in my family since 1947, sitting on a quiet street in Asheville, North Carolina, with its white clapboard siding and green shutters that my great-grandfather had painted himself decades ago. I had driven up from Charlotte 3 days earlier to finally claim what was rightfully mine after months of legal paperwork and estate settlements. My great-grandfather, Joseph Xavier, had passed away at 98 years old, and in his will, he had left this house directly to me, skipping over my father and going straight to his great-grandson. The old man always said I reminded him of himself when he was young, and I guess that meant something to him in his final days. The pounding continued, more aggressive now, and I walked to the door with confusion swirling in my head. I had not told many people I was here yet, just a few family members and the lawyer who had helped me through the inheritance process. When I opened the door, a middle-aged woman with short blonde hair and a pinched expression stood there with her arms crossed, flanked by 2 men in polo shirts who looked like they would rather be anywhere else. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm even though my heart was already racing from the aggressive knocking. "You can start by telling me who you are and what you are doing in this house," the woman snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She wore pressed khaki pants and a white blouse with a name tag that read Patricia and underneath it, HOA President. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe like I was something unpleasant she had stepped in. "I am Jacob Xavier," I said slowly, emphasizing my last name. "This is my house. I inherited it from my great-grandfather." Patricia's laugh was cold and humorless. "Nice try, but this house belongs to the estate of Joseph Xavier, who passed away months ago. The HOA has been trying to contact the estate for weeks about unpaid dues and property violations. You are clearly an intruder who broke in, and I have already called the police." My stomach dropped. "You called the police? I did not break in. I have keys. I have documents proving this house is mine." "Documents can be forged," one of the men behind her said, speaking up for the first time. He had a thick Southern accent and kept glancing back at the street like he was waiting for the cops to arrive any second. "I did not forge anything," I shot back, feeling anger rise in my chest. "Look, I understand there might be some confusion, but I am the legal owner of this property. My great-grandfather left it to me in his will, and the probate process finished 6 weeks ago. I have the deed with my name on it." Patricia stepped forward, and I instinctively moved to block the doorway. "If you really are who you say you are, then you would know about the HOA rules and regulations. This property has been in violation for months. The grass is overgrown, there is peeling paint on the shutters, and someone reported seeing lights on at odd hours, which suggests squatting activity." "The lights were me," I said through gritted teeth. "I have been here for 3 days cleaning the place out and going through my great-grandfather's belongings. And I am sorry about the yard, but I just got here. I plan to take care of it this weekend." "That is what they all say," Patricia replied, her tone dripping with condescension. "I am the president of the Mountain View Estates Homeowners Association, and I take property values very seriously. This neighborhood has standards, and this house has been dragging down values for months. If you cannot prove right now that you own this property, I want you out." The sound of sirens cut through the air before I could respond, and my heart sank even further. 2 police cruisers pulled up to the curb, and 4 officers got out, their hands resting casually on their belts as they approached. Patricia immediately turned to them with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Officers, thank goodness you are here," she said, her voice suddenly sweet and concerned. This man has broken into one of our neighborhood homes. The owner passed away and the estate has been vacant. We have had concerns about squatters in the area." One of the officers, a tall man with graying hair and a name tag that read Officer Morrison, looked at me with a neutral expression. "Sir, can you tell me what you are doing here?" I took a deep breath, trying to calm the panic rising in my throat. "My name is Jacob Xavier. This house belonged to my great-grandfather, Joseph Xavier. He passed away in November and I inherited the property. I have all the legal documents inside proving ownership." "He claims to have documents," Patricia interjected quickly, "but anyone can forge paperwork." "I have been the HOA president here for 8 years, and I know every property and every owner in this neighborhood. I have never seen this man before in my life." Officer Morrison held up a hand to silence her, which I appreciated. "Sir, do you have identification?" "Yes, of course." I pulled out my wallet and handed him my driver's license. He studied it carefully, then looked up at me. "And you said you have documents proving ownership inside?" "Yes, sir. The deed, the will, probate documents, everything. It is all in a folder on the kitchen table." "I can get it right now if you want." The officer nodded. "I will come with you." Patricia started to follow, but Officer Morrison stopped her. "Madam, please wait here. We will handle this." I led the officer inside, acutely aware of his presence behind me as we walked through the hallway. The house still smelled like my great-grandfather, that mixture of old books and pipe tobacco that I remembered from visits as a kid. The furniture was covered in dust sheets, and boxes of belongings were stacked against the walls where I had been sorting through them. On the kitchen table, exactly where I said it would be, was a manila folder containing all my documentation. I handed it to Officer Morrison, who sat down and began reading through everything carefully. The deed showed the property had been transferred to me, Jacob Matthew Xavier, with an effective date of January 3rd. The will was notarized and signed, and the probate documents showed the court had approved the transfer of assets. Officer Morrison looked up at me after several minutes. "These appear to be legitimate. Do you have any other proof of your relationship to the deceased?" "I have photos," I said quickly, moving to one of the boxes. I pulled out an old album that I had found the day before, filled with pictures of family gatherings. I flipped to a page showing my great-grandfather holding me as a baby, then another of us at my high school graduation, and several more recent ones from family dinners. "This is me and my great-grandfather over the years." The officer studied the photos, comparing my face in them to my current appearance. Finally, he nodded and stood up. "Mr. Xavier, everything here appears to be in order. You are clearly the legal owner of this property." The relief that washed over me was so intense I almost felt dizzy. "Thank you, officer." We walked back outside together, where Patricia was still waiting with her arms crossed and a smug expression on her face. That expression faltered when she saw Officer Morrison's neutral demeanor. "Madam, Mr. Xavier is the legal owner of this property," the officer said firmly. "He has provided proof of ownership through legal documents and personal identification. There is no crime here, no trespassing, and no reason for further police involvement." Patricia's face turned red. "That is impossible. The estate has not responded to any of our letters or phone calls. We have been trying to contact someone about this property for months." "My great-grandfather was 98 years old and in hospice care for his last 3 months," I said, unable to keep the anger out of my voice. "He was not exactly in a position to respond to HOA complaints, and after he died, the property was in probate. I got legal ownership 6 weeks ago, and I have been dealing with my own job and life in Charlotte before I could drive up here to take possession." "Well, that does not excuse months of violations," Patricia shot back. You owe the HOA over $2,000 in fines, and that is not including the legal fees we incurred trying to track down the estate. Officer Morrison sighed. Madam, that is a civil matter between you and Mr. Xavier. It is not a police issue. If you have concerns about HOA violations, you need to follow your association's proper procedures and give the new owner reasonable time to address any issues. Patricia opened her mouth to argue, but the officer cut her off. Unless you have evidence of an actual crime, we are done here. Have a good day. He nodded to me and walked back to his cruiser, and the other officers followed suit. Within minutes, they were gone, leaving me standing on the porch with Patricia and her 2 HOA board members. This is not over, Patricia said, her voice low and threatening. You may own this house, but you are still part of this HOA, and you will follow our rules. I expect that yard to be mowed within 48 hours, the shutters repainted within 2 weeks, and full payment of all outstanding fines within 30 days. If you fail to comply, we will place a lien on this property. Are you serious right now? I asked, disbelief coloring my tone. You just falsely accused me of being an intruder and called the police on me for legally being in my own house, and now you are threatening me with fines. I was protecting the neighborhood, Patricia said coldly. And those fines are legitimate, assessed according to our HOA bylaws. Your great-grandfather signed the covenant agreement when he purchased this property in 1947, and those obligations transfer with ownership. One of the men behind her, who had been silent this whole time, finally spoke up. Patricia, maybe we should give the man some time to settle in before we start talking about fines. He just got here. Patricia whirled on him. Don't you start, Dennis. We have rules for a reason. If we let one person slide, everyone will think they can ignore our standards. She turned back to me. You have your timeline, Mr. Xavier. I suggest you start working immediately. She stalked off toward a silver SUV parked down the street, and her 2 board members followed with apologetic glances in my direction. I stood on the porch, shaking with anger and disbelief at what had just happened. In the span of 30 minutes, I had been accused of being a criminal in my own home, had police called on me, and been threatened with fines and liens. I went back inside and slammed the door harder than necessary, then spent the next hour pacing around the house trying to calm down. Eventually, I called my father in Florida, where he had retired 2 years earlier. Hey, Jake, he answered on the 3rd ring, sounding relaxed and happy. How is the house? The house is fine, but I just had the worst experience with the HOA, I said, and then launched into the full story of Patricia's accusation and the police showing up. My father listened quietly, then let out a long whistle. Your great-grandfather always complained about that HOA. They started getting aggressive about 10 years ago, when new people moved into the neighborhood, and decided it needed to be more upscale. He told me they were constantly sending him letters about stupid things, like his mailbox being the wrong shade of black or his grass being a 1/4 inch too tall. Why did not he fight back? He was old and tired, Jake. He just wanted to live out his days in peace. He would pay the small fines when he had to and ignore them when he could, but it sounds like they have gotten worse since he passed. They are saying I owe over $2,000 in fines, I said, rubbing my temples. And they are threatening to put a lien on the property if I do not pay within 30 days. My father was quiet for a moment. Listen, Jake, I know your great-grandfather kept meticulous records. When I was helping him with paperwork in his last year, he showed me boxes of files he had kept since he bought that house. Every receipt, every document, every letter. If the HOA has been sending violations, he probably kept all of them. You might want to look through those records carefully before you do anything else." That was actually good advice. After I hung up with my father, I started searching through the boxes more systematically. My great-grandfather had been a mechanical engineer who worked for a manufacturing company for 40 years, and his organizational skills were impressive. In the back bedroom that he had used as an office, I found an entire filing cabinet dedicated to house documents. The top drawer contained the original purchase documents from 1947, showing that my great-grandfather had bought the house for $8,500. The deed was there, along with the original mortgage papers that showed he had paid off the loan in full by 1960. But it was the second drawer that caught my attention, labeled HOA correspondence. I pulled out the folder and sat down at the desk, reading through decades of letters. The early ones, from the 1950s through the 1980s, were polite and reasonable, mostly about neighborhood improvements and voluntary community events. But starting around 2014, the tone changed dramatically. The letters became aggressive, threatening, and filled with violations for increasingly petty issues. One letter from 2016 cited my great-grandfather for having a crack in his driveway that was wider than the allowed quarter-inch. Another from 2018 fined him $300 for leaving his trash cans visible from the street 15 minutes past the designated pickup time. A third from 2020 demanded he replace his roof because the shingles were showing signs of age, even though there was no leak or structural damage. What shocked me more was finding my great-grandfather's responses. He had not just passively accepted these violations. He had written back, clearly and forcefully, pointing out inconsistencies in the HOA's enforcement and questioning the validity of many fines. In several cases, he had referenced the original HOA covenant from 1947, which apparently had very different rules than what was being enforced now. I found the original covenant in a protective sleeve at the bottom of the drawer. It was a simple document, just 3 pages long, establishing basic rules about property maintenance and prohibiting commercial use of residential properties. It said nothing about mailbox colors, trash and visibility times, or driveway crack widths. The covenant stated it could only be amended by a vote of at least 75% of all homeowners in the neighborhood, with proper notice given to all parties at least 60 days in advance. Curious now, I kept digging and found something fascinating. In 2015, the HOA had apparently held a vote to adopt new, more restrictive bylaws. The meeting minutes were in the file, along with a letter from my great-grandfather objecting to the vote. He had written that only 32 homeowners voted in favor of the new bylaws, out of 108 total properties in the neighborhood. That was less than 30%, nowhere close to the 75% required by the original covenant. My great-grandfather had argued that the new bylaws were therefore invalid, and that the HOA could not legally enforce them. The HOA's response, signed by a different president back then, had dismissed his concerns and stated that the vote was valid because it represented a majority of homeowners who attended the meeting, not a majority of all homeowners. I sat back in the chair, my mind racing. If my great-grandfather was right, then the HOA had been operating under invalid bylaws for 11 years. Every fine they had assessed based on those bylaws, including the ones they were now trying to charge me, would be legally unenforceable. I pulled out my phone and started searching for real estate attorneys in Asheville. I needed professional help to understand what I was dealing with, and I needed it fast. I found a firm called Morrison & Associates that had good reviews and specialized in property law and HOA disputes. I called immediately, even though it was already past 5 in the evening. "Morrison and Associates, this is Jennifer speaking," a pleasant voice answered. "Hi, my name is Jacob Xavier, and I need to speak with someone about an HOA dispute. It is somewhat urgent." "Let me see if anyone is available. Can you hold for just a moment?" Soft jazz played in my ear for about 30 seconds before a man's voice came on the line. "This is Paul Morrison. Jennifer said you have an urgent HOA matter." I spent the next 20 minutes explaining everything that had happened, from Patricia calling me an intruder to my discovery of my great-grandfather's files, and the questionable validity of the HOA's bylaws. Paul Morrison listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of acknowledgement. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. "Mr. Xavier, if what you are telling me is accurate, you might have a significant case here. HOAs are legally bound to follow their own governing documents, and if those documents require a 75% vote to amend the covenant, then a 30% vote would not be valid. Can you bring those files to my office tomorrow morning?" "Absolutely." "What time?" "Let's say 9 o'clock. Bring everything you have related to the HOA, especially that original covenant and the meeting minutes from 2015. This is exactly the kind of case I enjoy taking on." I spent the rest of the evening organizing all the documents into chronological order, creating a timeline of the HOA's increasingly aggressive behavior toward my great-grandfather. By the time I went to bed, I had a stack of papers 2 inches thick, documenting years of harassment and questionable fines. The next morning, I drove to Morrison and Associates' office in downtown Asheville. It was located in a renovated historic building with exposed brick walls and large windows overlooking the street. Paul Morrison turned out to be a man in his early 50s with sharp eyes and a firm handshake. He led me to a conference room, and we spread out all the documents on the large table. "This is impressive record keeping," Paul said, flipping through the files. "Your great-grandfather documented everything. He was an engineer. He believed in keeping records." Paul picked up the original covenant and read it carefully, then examined the 2015 meeting minutes. "This is exactly what I suspected. The HOA has been operating outside its legal authority for over a decade. The question is, how do we want to proceed? What are my options?" "Well, the nuclear option would be to sue the HOA for unlawful enforcement and seek to invalidate every fine they have assessed under the illegal bylaws. We could also demand they refund any money your great-grandfather paid under protest. That would cost you some money upfront in legal fees, but if we win, the HOA would likely have to pay your legal costs plus damages." "What is the non-nuclear option?" Paul leaned back in his chair. "We send them a very strongly worded letter explaining that their bylaws are invalid and that you will not be paying any fines assessed under those bylaws. We give them the opportunity to back down quietly. If they do not, then we proceed with legal action." I thought about it for a moment. I did not really want a protracted legal battle, but I also was not going to let Patricia and her HOA bully me the way they had apparently bullied my great-grandfather. "Let's start with the letter. If they want to fight, then we will take them to court." Smart choice. "I will draft something today and have it sent to the HOA president via certified mail. In the meantime, I would suggest you do not communicate with them directly about this matter. Let me handle all the contact." I left the attorney's office feeling more confident than I had since arriving in Asheville. I spent the rest of that day and the next one actually working on the house, cleaning out old belongings, and organizing what I wanted to keep versus what could be donated or thrown away. The house itself was structurally sound, but it needed some cosmetic updates after years of an elderly man living alone. On the third day after my meeting with Paul, I was out front mowing the lawn when a car pulled up and Patricia got out, her face already twisted in anger. I turned off the mower and waited for whatever was coming. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, waving a piece of paper at me. "Your lawyer sent me this ridiculous letter claiming our HOA bylaws are invalid. That is complete nonsense, and you know it." "I actually do not think it is nonsense at all," I said calmly. "My attorney reviewed all the documents, including your own meeting minutes from 2015, and determined that the bylaw amendments were not properly approved according to the original covenant." Patricia's face turned an alarming shade of red. "We followed all proper procedures. The board voted and approved those amendments." "The board does not get to decide," I countered. "The covenant clearly states that amendments require approval by 75% of all homeowners. According to your own minutes, only 32 people voted in favor. That is less than 30% of the 108 properties in this neighborhood. Those were the only people who bothered to show up to the meeting," Patricia snapped. "We cannot force people to attend." "The vote was valid among those present." "That is not what the covenant says. It says 75% of all homeowners, not 75% of attendees. The language is very clear." Patricia took a step closer, and I could see her hands shaking with rage. "You are making a huge mistake. This HOA has been running smoothly for years, maintaining property values and keeping this neighborhood desirable. Your great-grandfather was a stubborn old man who refused to follow simple rules, and it looks like you are going down the same path." "My great-grandfather was a man who understood legal documents and recognized when an organization was overstepping its authority," I said, feeling my own anger rise. "And calling the police on me and falsely accusing me of being an intruder was way over the line. You could have handled that situation a dozen different ways, but you chose the most aggressive option possible." "I was protecting the neighborhood," Patricia insisted, but her voice wavered slightly. "You were on a power trip," I shot back. "And now you are upset because someone finally called you out on it. My attorney's letter was very clear. I will not be paying any fines assessed under invalid bylaws, and if the HOA wants to fight this, we are prepared to take it to court." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Fine. If that is how you want to play it, the HOA board will fight you every step of the way. We have insurance that covers legal fees, and we can drag this out for years if we need to. Can you afford that? My attorney seems to think we have a very strong case." And according to him, when an HOA loses this kind of lawsuit, they typically have to pay the plaintiffs legal fees plus damages. So you might want to check with your insurance company about whether they will really cover a fight over bylaws that were never legally adopted. I could see the doubt flicker across Patricia's face for just a moment before she masked it with anger again. "We will see what the board has to say about this. Don't think you have won anything yet." She stormed back to her car and peeled out, leaving tire marks on the street. I stood there for a moment, adrenaline pumping through my system, then went back to mowing the lawn. When I finished an hour later, I called Paul Morrison to let him know about the confrontation. "She is rattled," Paul said with satisfaction in his voice. "That is good. It means she knows we have a legitimate argument. I would expect the HOA to schedule an emergency board meeting to discuss this. They will probably consult with their own attorney, and that attorney is going to tell them the same thing I told you. And if they decide to fight anyway, then we file a lawsuit and let a judge sort it out. But honestly, Jake, I think there is a good chance they will back down once their attorney explains the situation. Most HOA insurance policies do not cover losses from the HOA's own mistakes, and that is essentially what this is." Paul turned out to be right. A week later, I received another letter from the HOA, this time signed by Patricia and 2 other board members. The tone was notably different, more formal and less aggressive. The letter stated that the board was conducting an internal review of its bylaws and enforcement procedures, and that all outstanding fines against my property were being placed on hold pending the completion of that review. "That is code for our attorney told us we screwed up," Paul said when I called to read him the letter. "They are buying time to figure out how to handle this without admitting fault." "So what do I do?" "Nothing. You wait. They are on the defensive now. Let them come to us with a proposal." Waiting was harder than I expected. I spent the next 3 weeks working on the house, painting the shutters myself and fixing small issues that had accumulated over the years. Neighbors started stopping by to introduce themselves, and I learned that I was not the only person who had issues with Patricia and the HOA board. An elderly man named George who lived 3 houses down came by with a 6-pack of beer one evening and sat on the porch with me. "Your great-grandfather was a good man," he said, taking a sip of his beer. "We used to play chess together every Thursday until he got too sick. He told me about his fights with the HOA, made him crazy in his last years." "Did you know about the bylaw vote in 2015? I asked. George nodded. "I was at that meeting. Patricia and her friends pushed it through late on a Tuesday evening in January, right after the holidays when half the neighborhood was still out of town. I voted against it, but there were not enough of us there to stop it. Your great-grandfather tried to challenge it afterward, but the board just ignored him. How many other people feel the way you do? More than you would think," George said, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret. "But most folks do not want the hassle of fighting the HOA. They pay the stupid fines and move on with their lives. It is easier than dealing with Patricia's harassment." That conversation stuck with me. Over the next few days, I started knocking on doors and talking to neighbors. I learned that Patricia had been HOA president for 8 years and had become increasingly authoritarian in her enforcement. People had stories of being fined for ridiculous violations, like having the wrong shade of mulch in their flower beds or parking their cars facing the wrong direction in their own driveways. One woman, a teacher named Rachel who lived on the corner, showed me a stack of violation notices she had received over the past 2 years. One was for having a garden gnome that was visible from the street, which apparently violated the prohibition on tacky lawn ornaments. Another was for having a wreath on her door outside of the designated holiday decoration period, which ran from December 1st to January 6th. She had left her Christmas wreath up until January 10th and been fined $150. Why do not people band together and vote her out? I asked. Rachel laughed bitterly. "The HOA board elections are a joke. They schedule them during the day on weekdays when most people are at work, and they only publicize them with a single notice in the monthly newsletter. Patricia and her friends make sure to show up and vote for each other. The rest of us do not even know it is happening until it is over." An idea was forming in my mind, but before I could act on it, I received a phone call from Paul Morrison. The HOA's attorney reached out to me. They want to meet and discuss a settlement. What kind of settlement? They did not say specifically, but the fact that they are asking for a meeting means they know they are in trouble. I think we should hear what they have to say. Are you available tomorrow afternoon at 2? The meeting was held at Paul's office. Patricia showed up with 2 other board members, Dennis and a woman named Brenda, along with their attorney, a nervous-looking man in his 30s named Kevin Wright. We all sat around the conference table, and the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Kevin cleared his throat and began. My clients have asked me to convey their willingness to resolve this dispute without litigation. After reviewing the historical documents and the HOA's governing instruments, there are some questions about the technical validity of the 2015 bylaw amendments. Some questions, Paul said with a slight edge to his voice. That is an interesting way to describe a vote that fell about 50 percentage points short of the required threshold. Kevin's face flushed. Yes. Well, there are different interpretations of how the voting requirements should be calculated. However, in the interest of avoiding costly litigation, my clients are prepared to make the following offer. All outstanding fines against Mr. Xavier's property will be forgiven and removed from the record. In exchange, Mr. Xavier will agree not to challenge the validity of the current HOA bylaws and will comply with all future regulations. I looked at Paul, who gave a tiny shake of his head. That is not going to work, I said. You want me to accept bylaws that were never legally adopted so you can continue enforcing them against me and everyone else in the neighborhood? Not happening. Patricia leaned forward, her voice tight. We are trying to be reasonable here. We are forgiving over $2,000 in legitimate fines. Legitimate according to bylaws that you had no authority to adopt, Paul interjected. Let me be clear about what is really at stake here. If we file this lawsuit and win, which I am confident we will, the court will invalidate those bylaws. Every fine you have ever assessed under those bylaws could be challenged and refunded. We are talking about potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars over 11 years. Plus, there could be damages for harassment and abuse of authority. Is that really the path you want to go down? The three board members exchanged worried glances. Brenda, who had been silent until now, spoke up. What do you want? Complete invalidation of the 2015 bylaws, I said. The HOA returns to operating under the original 1947 covenant until such time as proper amendments can be voted on according to the correct procedures. All fines assessed under the invalid bylaws are forgiven for everyone in the neighborhood, not just me. And Patricia steps down as HOA president. Patricia's face went pale, then red. Absolutely not. I have dedicated years of my life to this neighborhood. I am not stepping down because some entitled newcomer does not like following rules. You called the police on me and falsely accused me of being an intruder in my own home, I said, keeping my voice level even though I wanted to shout. You have harassed residents with petty violations and excessive fines for years. You abused your authority and operated the HOA outside its legal bounds. You should step down. The other board members and I will vote on leadership, Patricia said stubbornly. That is how it works. Actually, Dennis said quietly, and everyone turned to look at him. He looked uncomfortable but determined. Actually, I think Jake has a point, Patricia. This whole situation has gotten out of hand. We never should have called the police without verifying ownership first. And if the bylaws really are invalid, then we have been enforcing rules we had no right to enforce. That is a serious problem. Patricia stared at him in disbelief. You cannot be serious, Dennis. You voted for those bylaws. You have supported every decision I have made as president. I voted for them because you told us the vote was valid, Dennis replied. But if it was not, then everything we have done since then is questionable. I do not want the HOA to get sued into bankruptcy because we were too stubborn to admit a mistake. Brenda nodded slowly. I agree with Dennis. Maybe we should consider Mr. Xavier's proposal. If it means avoiding a lawsuit and the potential financial exposure, it might be the smart move. Patricia looked like she had been slapped. Her mouth opened and closed several times before she finally found words. Fine. If that is how you all feel, then you can deal with this mess yourselves. I quit. She stood up abruptly, grabbed her purse, and walked out of the conference room, slamming the door behind her. The room was silent for a long moment. Kevin looked like he wished he could disappear into his chair. Dennis and Brenda stared at each other in shock. "Well," Paul said dryly, "that is one way to resolve the leadership issue. It took another hour of negotiation, but we eventually hammered out an agreement. The HOA would formally rescind the 2015 bylaws and return to operating under the original covenant. All fines assessed under the invalid bylaws would be forgiven for all homeowners, and anyone who had paid such fines in the past 3 years would receive a refund. Dennis would take over as interim president, and the HOA would schedule a proper election within 60 days, with notice sent to all homeowners and voting allowed by mail and ballot for those who could not attend in person. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue any lawsuit against the HOA or seek damages for the harassment I had experienced. I also agreed to bring my property into compliance with the original covenant's basic maintenance standards, which were reasonable and not overly burdensome. Paul drafted the agreement, and everyone except Patricia signed it. Kevin said he would track her down to get her signature, or if she refused, they would proceed without it since she had resigned from the board. As we were leaving, Dennis pulled me aside. "Thank you for standing up to her. A lot of us knew something was wrong, but we did not have the knowledge or resources to fight back. Your great-grandfather tried, but he was just one old man against the entire board." "My great-grandfather documented everything carefully," I said. "That is what made this possible. If he had not kept all those records, I would never have known about the invalid vote. He was a smart man. I am glad his house went to someone who would fight for what is right." Over the next few weeks, word spread through the neighborhood about what had happened. I received more visits from neighbors, some thanking me and others just curious about the whole situation. George came by again and told me that several people were already planning to run for the HOA board in the upcoming election, hoping to establish new leadership that would be more reasonable and less authoritarian. Rachel, the teacher with the garden gnome, organized a neighborhood barbecue to celebrate what she called Liberation Day. Dozens of people showed up, and I heard story after story about Patricia's ridiculous enforcement actions over the years. One man had been fined for having grass that was too green, which apparently suggested he was using too much fertilizer and not being environmentally conscious. Another woman had been cited for having curtains that were the wrong shade of white as viewed from the street. "I cannot believe we put up with this for so long," Rachel said, shaking her head. "It is like we all just accepted that this was normal HOA behavior." "A lot of people do," I said. "HOAs can be great when they are run properly, but they can also become little authoritarian nightmares when the wrong people get power. The key is having good governing documents and homeowners who are willing to stay involved and hold the board accountable." The HOA held its election on a Saturday in late April, and the turnout was unprecedented. Over 80 homeowners either attended in person or submitted mail-in ballots. Dennis was elected president by a wide margin, and 3 new board members were chosen, including George and Rachel. Patricia did not attend the meeting, and I heard through the grapevine that she had put her house up for sale and was planning to move to a different neighborhood where she could be with people who understood the importance of standards. As for me, I decided to keep the house in Asheville rather than sell it. My job in Charlotte was mostly remote anyway, and I found I liked the slower pace and friendly community in my great-grandfather's old neighborhood. I spent the summer renovating the house, updating the kitchen and bathrooms while keeping the original character that made it special. One evening in July, I was sitting on the porch with a beer, watching the sunset when a car pulled up and a woman about my age got out. She had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and was wearing jeans and a t-shirt with a local brewery's logo on it. "Hi," she said, walking up to the porch. "I am Penelope Sullivan. I live 2 streets over, and I just wanted to introduce myself and thank you for what you did with the HOA." "Jake Xavier," I said, standing up and shaking her hand. "And honestly, I just stood up for myself. I did not realize it would turn into this whole neighborhood thing." Penelope laughed. "Well, intentional or not, you made a lot of people's lives better." Patricia fined me 3 times last year for various ridiculous reasons, including once because my dog barked at 7 in the morning and apparently disturbed the peace. I work nights as a nurse, and 7 in the morning is like the middle of the afternoon for me. My dog barks when the mail carrier comes. That is what dogs do. "That is insane," I said, shaking my head. It was, but it is better now. Dennis actually listens to people and tries to be reasonable. The new board even voted to use HOA funds to throw a neighborhood party in August, which is something Patricia would never have allowed because she said it was a waste of money. We talked for over an hour, and I learned that Penelope had grown up in Asheville and loved the city. She was funny and easy to talk to, and when she left, she mentioned that maybe I would want to check out a local hiking trail sometime and she would be happy to show me around. I said that sounded great, and we exchanged numbers. As summer turned to fall, I settled into my new life in Asheville. I kept my job in Charlotte, but worked remotely most of the time, only driving down for important meetings. The house became truly mine as I finished the renovations and added my own touches, while respecting the history and character of the place. The HOA under its new leadership was completely different. They focused on actual important issues, like maintaining common areas and organizing community events, rather than harassing homeowners over petty violations. The neighborhood felt friendlier and more relaxed, and I noticed more people outside, talking to each other and enjoying their properties without fear of being cited for some minor infraction. I went hiking with Penelope several times, and those hikes turned into dinners, which turned into a genuine relationship. She loved hearing stories about my great-grandfather, and I loved her knowledge of local history and her passion for the community. One Saturday in October, I was working in the yard when a police car pulled up. My heart jumped for a moment, remembering the last time a cop had shown up at this house, but then I saw it was Officer Morrison, the same officer who had checked my documents that first day. He got out of the car with a smile. "Mr. Xavier, I wanted to stop by and talk to you for a minute if you have time." "Of course, officer. Is everything okay?" "Everything is fine," he assured me. "I actually wanted to tell you about a complaint we received." Patricia, the former HOA president, came into the station last week and tried to file a report claiming you had harassed and intimidated her into resigning from the board. She wanted us to investigate you for threatening behavior. My stomach sank. That is completely false. There were witnesses at the meeting when she resigned. She left on her own after the other board members agreed to my settlement proposal. "I know," Officer Morrison said. "We followed up on it, spoke to the HOA's attorney and the other board members who were present. They all confirmed that you did not threaten anyone and that Patricia resigned voluntarily. We closed the complaint as unfounded, but I wanted to give you a heads up in case she tries anything else." "Thank you, officer. I appreciate that," he nodded. "You know, when I responded to that first call about an intruder, I could tell something was off. Patricia was way too aggressive about the whole thing, like she was on some kind of crusade. I am glad everything worked out and you were able to prove ownership. And from what I hear around the neighborhood, you did this community a favor by standing up to that HOA board." After he left, I called Paul Morrison to let him know about Patricia's attempt to file a police report. He laughed and said it was a last desperate attempt to cause trouble, but since the complaint had been dismissed as unfounded, there was nothing to worry about. Some people just cannot accept when they have lost, Paul said. Patricia spent years wielding power in that neighborhood, and you took it away from her. She is going to be bitter about that for a long time. But legally, there is nothing she can do to you. The settlement agreement is signed and filed. The HOA bylaws have been rescinded. You won. That night, I sat in my great-grandfather's old study, which I had converted into a home office. I looked at the photo of him on the wall, taken when he was about my age, standing in front of this very house with a proud smile on his face. "I hope I made you proud, old man," I said quietly to the photograph. "You fought them for years, and I was able to finish what you started." I like to think he would have been happy with how things turned out. The house he had loved and maintained for over 70 years was in good hands. The neighborhood he had been part of for so long was healing from years of authoritarian HOA rule. And his great-grandson had learned the importance of standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult and uncomfortable. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. I opened it to find Penelope standing there with a bottle of wine and a smile. "I thought you might want some company," she said. "Plus, I brought that wine you liked from the restaurant last week." "Perfect timing," I said, stepping aside to let her in. "I was just sitting here thinking about my great-grandfather and everything that has happened since I inherited this place." We sat on the porch as the evening cooled down, drinking wine and talking about everything and nothing. At some point, George walked by walking his dog and waved. A family with young kids rode past on bikes, and they called out friendly greetings. Rachel drove by and honked her horn cheerfully. This was what a neighborhood was supposed to be like, I realized. Not people living in fear of being cited for ridiculous violations, but a real community where neighbors knew and cared about each other. "What are you thinking about?" Penelope asked, noticing my quiet moment. "Just that I am glad I did not give up and walk away when Patricia called the police on me that first day," I said. "It would have been easier to just sell the house and go back to Charlotte. But this place, this house, it means something. My great-grandfather left it to me for a reason, and I think I finally understand what that reason was." "What was it?" "He wanted someone to finish the fight he started. He wanted someone who would not let the HOA push them around, who would stand up for what was right even when it was hard. He could have left the house to my father or one of my uncles, but he left it to me. I think he knew I would do what needed to be done." Penelope reached over and squeezed my hand. "He chose well." As the stars came out and the night settled over Asheville, I felt truly at home for the first time since arriving at my great-grandfather's house. The battle with the HOA had been stressful and sometimes scary, but it had also connected me to my family's history, and to this community in a way I had never expected. The house on the quiet street with its white clapboard siding and green shutters was more than just property. It was a legacy, a responsibility, and a reminder that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stand up for what is right, even when powerful people try to intimidate you into backing down. Patricia had called me an intruder in my great-grandfather's house, but in the end, the deed had proved ownership both legally and morally. This house was mine, this neighborhood was my home, and I had helped make it a better place for everyone who lived here. That was worth more than any amount of money or any amount of peace I might have gained by just walking away. My great-grandfather had fought for years against an unjust HOA. I had been able to finish that fight in a matter of months, thanks to his meticulous record-keeping and my willingness to stand firm in the face of threats and intimidation. Together, across the gap of generations, we had won. And that victory was going to echo through this neighborhood for years to come, long after Patricia and her authoritarian regime were forgotten. I raised my wine glass in a silent toast to the old man in the photograph inside, to the house he had loved, and to the community he had been part of for over 70 years. Then I turned back to Penelope and to the life I was building here, in the place where I finally, truly belonged.